From Iowa to D.C., we're the first in the nation, kicking off the 2024 election. You're watching Iowa's News Now, the 2024 Iowa Caucuses.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining this Iowa's News Now Caucus Night live stream. Nick Weig alongside Mitch Fick here, and we are just about 53 minutes now since the caucuses start, and about 21 minutes since they were called by a number of outlets for Donald Trump. That was the expectation coming into tonight with the lead he's held in so many polls for the better part of a year now. What we are really starting to get a sense of now, Nick, as the votes, so to speak, or the ballots and the count comes in, is just how many people went out there. We knew, or at least assumed, based on everything we saw, that Donald Trump was going to be your caucus winner in Iowa in 2024. We just didn't know how many people were willing to go out in 10 below weather to caucus for him and all the other candidates.
Right, and I think it's abundantly clear that Donald Trump supporters were willing to come out. Now, again, these numbers are very early on. We want to stress that because we're just getting a few of the precincts coming in. I think there's about 1,300 precincts in total. The counties shaded in red here are those where Donald Trump has the most votes so far in that county. We see Johnson County and then Story County, where Nikki Haley now has, Ron DeSantis actually is leading. Nikki Haley was leading some of these counties earlier, but it's kind of showing that Donald Trump continues to, in the early stages, dominate these rural parts of Iowa where he's amassing support and bringing in a lot of voters that normally don't take part in this process, and that's what he needs, because I think everyone knew going in he was going to win this. The networks called it extremely early, but the margin is going to be critical in terms of whether anybody can still mount a challenge to him in the future contests.
We talked about this a little bit before we started the stream. Trump supporters dating back to 2016 have kind of built a reputation for being almost feverish in their support and coming out in droves again, whether or not they voted before or maybe even being more willing. Maybe we're seen to brave the elements where other people are thinking, boy, especially if you're backing somebody who is supposed to finish 30 points behind him, well, what's the point even going out? You know, we stress every vote counts, and that's why you need to get out. Are we maybe already seeing, and again, it's very early, 2% reporting and 3% reporting, are we maybe already seeing the impact of that? And Trump, who's been leading 30, 35 points in the polls, maybe really runs away with this thing because people weigh the factors of the weather and the chance that their candidate wasn't going to have a big finish to begin with, and all of a sudden it really runs away for Trump, who has support that seemingly never wanes off.
Well, and that's what they were hoping for. But anybody interested in Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, or anybody else on this list, if they were going to these events, they were being reminded this is not a winner-take-all situation. Ted Cruz won the Iowa caucus in 2016. He only walked away with 8 of the 40 delegates because they were spread throughout the candidates. So the question will be, what will the margin be? How many delegates will Donald Trump get? Clearly, he's going to get the most. And then also, where does the party go from here? That's something that we've been kind of looking at. And we did get some entrance polling in from CBS News. And this was somewhat interesting. If Donald Trump fit to be president if convicted of a crime, almost by a 2-to-1 margin? Republican caucus goers said yes. We did also hear that roughly half or a little more of those who took part tonight said that they believe Joe Biden did not win the election in 2020. That is a verifiable lie that the president has repeated for years now, and it's sticking with his supporters. Another question, should there be a national ban on abortion? 58% of Republican caucus goers said yes, 36% said no. That, though, is not a top issue for Republicans. Obviously, with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, they feel as though they're kind of on the winning side of this issue, even though it is ongoing. Immigration, the number one issue among caucus goers at 40%, 35% was the economy, and then at 11% foreign policy and abortion. Now, one thing to look a little further ahead, and we'll mention this again later too, this is the first of several contests in just the next few weeks. The New Hampshire primary is in 8 days. Nikki Haley is hoping to score a win there. Nevada, I'm going to get back to that because it is a very convoluted, and let's just say the candidates are largely ignoring this one. U.S. Virgin Islands, South Carolina primary. This is another one Nikki Haley needs to do well in because this is her home state, and there's a question if she can even win it right now. And then Michigan primary before Super Tuesday. That's the big kahuna. Now, after all of these contests, all of these will be sent, or will be the delegates will be proportionally handed out between the candidates that receive votes. After Super Tuesday, any states not on this list can do winner take all. So the Republican Party is trying to make it more competitive between now and March, but they want this settled quickly after Super Tuesday.
And we talked a lot leading into this about Haley's chances in New Hampshire if she had a really strong finish in Iowa. There are some experts out there who said if DeSantis finishes far enough behind, does he suspend his campaign? And a lot of speculation about that. Early on, if you're in Nikki Haley's camp and you see you're still 35, 36 points behind Trump, how are you feeling about 8 days from now, next Tuesday in New Hampshire?
Well, one wild card in this is she was polling within striking distance of Donald Trump 2 to 3 weeks ago. Well, Chris Christie has dropped out since then. Chris Christie was the most adamant anti-Trump candidate in the Republican race. Many of those voters undoubtedly, perhaps half, are likely to go to Nikki Haley. Is that enough to put her over the edge? He was polling at about 15%. It could be. So that could get her a sizable number of delegates, maybe close the gap with Trump after the first two contests. And then South Carolina, if she can pull off a win there, again, she can hold the delegate count close to Trump. But Super Tuesday is going to be a real big question because that is a number of states going at the same time, again, proportional, but nationwide, Trump is leading by more than 50 points, and that margin is seen in many of these states. Will that close if Nikki Haley gets a win or two? And will Ron DeSantis stay in this race? And where will his voters go? That's another question because there is a likelihood many of them will actually go to Donald Trump.
And Michigan has been a huge factor, obviously won by Biden in 2020. There's been some talk of does that start to lean a little more red depending on if Trump wins the nomination. That seems like a pretty big primary there coming up at the end of the month as well.
Absolutely. And that is a race that is of deep concern to the Biden campaign because polling has showed him trailing in the battleground states. Again, by a slim margin of error, he is leading against Donald Trump nationwide, but he is not winning in the battleground states he needs to win. Now, of course, we're several months out right now. Things can change. Economic factors, any other kinds of major diplomatic crises we don't even know about yet. So they believe that there is still time, but that is one that they're going to watch closely, particularly with turnout and whether Republicans in Michigan are locked in on Donald Trump or if they want to try and find a better option.
Are you surprised? You showed the survey from CBS News of if Trump is convicted of a crime, is he still fit to be president? It was 2-1, yes. Does that surprise you? I mean, we've talked about just how much Trump supporters support Trump and how much they continue to believe in him. But does that result surprise you that even if, and again, he's facing almost 100 different...
And we just lost it.
Of course we did. Of course we did. That's what the live stream is. But does that surprise you that even though he faces more than 100 federal charges, or almost 100 federal charges, and is... Again, we were talking, he goes to court tomorrow to continue facing some allegations. Does this still support, as we've seen more unfold, does this surprise you? That people, at least GOP caucus goers, are still willing, regardless if there is a conviction or not, to support this man for another chance at president?
I think you got to keep in mind that the vast majority of Americans, unlike us, don't follow this every day, and they hear what they hear on social media. They're not following these cases. They're constantly being delayed. There's a good chance that when they hear everybody that they listen to, including the former president, say that this is Biden coming after him. If they come after me, they're going to come after you. That's resonating with them. And so whether or not they're looking into this, if they're not, and most people would not, it's not fun, trust me, but obviously they're going to side with him, and they feel that if he's convicted that he should still be president. Now, 31%, roughly, that's about what we're seeing nationally in terms of voters who are not choosing the president right now. Now, what that means here in Iowa, obviously, large support, still holding on to most of the support with evangelicals, despite Ron DeSantis getting endorsements from Governor Kim Reynolds, Bob Vander Plaats as the family leader. That is telling. I spoke to Governor Asa Hutchinson, who is obviously not doing well in the early stages tonight. And he said, the problem with his party right now is they are not a party of policy, they're a party of a person. And people are not voting for certain policies, certain conservative values. They're voting for Donald Trump, and that is still a winning formula right now.
And that's, I think, what is really striking we've seen in the last month or two. Kim Reynolds, typically you get a gubernatorial endorsement for a candidate, and that's a major boost for a candidate, regardless of who they are. Ron DeSantis gets Kim Reynolds support, And Ron's fighting for third in this race. And again, there's talk that he might drop out if he finishes. It's kind of a thing to marvel at, considering where we were a couple months ago, and considering him to maybe be the #1 challenger to Trump for the GOP nomination. And now we're talking about if he doesn't do well tonight, in 48 hours, he might be done. It's unlike anything we've seen, and we've said unlike anything we've seen quite a few times in the better part of a decade, just covering Trump's rise in the GOP, and some people might argue his takeover of the GOP.
And while I answer that, Mike, who's running our cast here right now, if you could get the Johnson County numbers ready, I'd love to see what those are so far.
Yeah, 1 second.
We have seen Johnson County jump between DeSantis and Haley so far a little bit, again, very early with these numbers coming in.
And both of these have been flipping somewhat, and that is, obviously it is a less conservative base in those counties. Those are college towns, and we are hearing, CBS News was at a precinct in Des Moines where they had to delay the vote because so many people were coming in. It was a very Democratic part of Des Moines, and people were coming in because you can go to your caucus site and you can change your registration to Republican and vote in this caucus. And there are many people choosing to do that to try and get a better option than Donald Trump or Joe Biden. And on top of that, it's not the easiest process if you do it same day, because not only do you have to have an ID, but you have to have some form that proves you are living in that precinct. And again, there's over 1,300 of them in Iowa for the Republican caucuses. So a very complicated matter. They asked those that were already there if they were willing to wait, and at that precinct they said yes. So that is going to hold up a lot of the numbers, especially in these larger precincts, because still right now we're looking at about 2,000 or 3,000 votes so far. The race has been called, but again, we're looking at those margins, and at least in the early phase, DeSantis and Haley are right around where the Iowa poll was showing them to be.
And listen, we've learned in the last, 8 years or so that those early polls, or even just leading up into the election, don't always tell us exactly what's going to happen. Typically, more often than not, they give us what we want, or what we're expecting to see on election night. But there have been some curveballs thrown. Even again, like you said early in, this is basically what we've seen now for the better part of a couple months.
Yeah, we do have those numbers from Johnson County. We can at least see them. Nikki Haley with 41% of the vote there. There's just about 300 or 400 votes cast, with 20% of the precincts reporting in Johnson County. But she's getting a 2-to-1 margin just about on Donald Trump. That's important because she needs to run up those numbers in some of those more populated counties. Now, how many people are caucusing in Johnson County for Republicans tonight? Hard to say. But any number she gets is going to run that number up, and could be enough to keep her ahead of Ron DeSantis, because in this reliably liberal part of Iowa, Ron DeSantis is third, Donald Trump still in second, Nikki Haley obviously the early favorite in Johnson County. Again, not enough to catch up to Donald Trump, but it could keep her ahead of DeSantis and provide some momentum heading into New Hampshire.
We mentioned the chances and the speculation that if DeSantis has a bad night, does his campaign continue forward? Vivek Ramaswamy, who faced the social wrath of Trump over the last couple of days, pulled the double Grassley, so to speak, visiting all 99 counties twice, and he's really touted that. He's shifted away from TV ads in the last couple of weeks. Where is his campaign, you've spoken to him as well, where is his campaign going? Because it feels like, as an outsider watching ads the last few weeks, it's been less about promoting him and leaning, if you didn't know any better, maybe campaigning for a position with Trump at some point.
Well, there's no question that Vivek Ramaswamy is a younger model of Donald Trump. He is extremely out there on his policies, talking about removing certain protections for native-born citizens. And that's something that would resonate with Trump supporters, but it hasn't been enough to take them away from the original article. His only opposition to Trump is that it's time for a new generation, is what he says. He won't criticize the former president. He simply says that it's time for a new generation. So obviously he's somebody that has been probably in Trump's ear quite a bit, and somebody that he's going to look towards, particularly with his business past, somebody that the former president would obviously have a lot in common with.
Do you think, and now I'm just asking you to speculate wildly, please go ahead on the internet here, Asa Hutchinson right now going behind Binkley, certainly not what he wanted to see, as Binkley's really made a push in the last few weeks in Iowa. Do you think 8 days from now, going into New Hampshire, that we have this full list? Or do you think, if it's not Hutchinson, if it's not Binkley, if it's DeSantis even, how many, do you have a ballpark of are we going to go in with 4, are we going to go in with 5? It sounds like you don't think it'll be 6.
No, it will not be 6. Binkley's a little bit of a enigma right now. He has been running a lot of ads. Whether that carries over to New Hampshire is anybody's guess. Asa Hutchinson, I'm not sure what would be the point in staying in this race at this point. I think he was trying to get his message out there, and he was really drowned out not only by Nikki Haley, but Chris Christie as well. I think that there's going to be an effort, especially depending on the margin for Trump tonight, for people like Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson possibly to begin rallying around Nikki Haley if she is shown as a strong enough candidate to perhaps beat Trump in New Hampshire and give him a run for his money in her home state of South Carolina.
This feels like maybe this could be already only a 2-candidate, maybe 3 at most candidate race by the time we get to Super Tuesday.
Well, and we talk about since 2010, Citizens United, super PAC money, dark money is a huge part of these races. And most of that money, not with Trump, is actually going to Nikki Haley. The Koch brothers Foundation, one of the biggest spenders in conservative politics, they're getting involved in a primary process for the first time ever, and they're backing Nikki Haley. There are several other mega donors getting behind her, not so much for the former president. He's getting a lot of his donations from that large MAGA base of his that are making smaller donations on a monthly basis. But Nikki Haley financially has staying power, and there is some speculation that even if she's far behind Trump, even if he gets the delegates he needs to secure the nomination, that doesn't guarantee him the nomination. It all comes down to the convention. The expectation in the modern era is that it doesn't change from what the vote was, but there's always a pressure valve that they can push. And if Nikki Haley stays in this race and perhaps public sentiment begins to turn against the former president, if he's convicted of some serious charges, they could have an out with Nikki Haley to either install her. And that, on the flip side, could also be a reason why you could see Donald Trump nominate a vice presidential running mate earlier than usual, because there would be a fight over, well, this is the ticket people were voting for. We should have this person and not Nikki Haley.
And I believe, Mike, that's a live look in Des Moines at Trump's campaign party.
Correct, yep.
You see there, those signs were updated very, very quickly to say Trump wins Iowa. Again, that was
They had them made.
That was the expectation, and again, 32 minutes really after, maybe at most 32 minutes after precincts opened. CNN, CBS News, a lot of outlets started calling the race already. As we keep getting those updates, you're getting a look at how the sausage is made, so to speak, folks.
These are to pull up the latest numbers.
These are how we build our graphics for online, and certainly we can move, or on air, and then certainly can move them online here. As this is the full look right now at Iowa. You see, this is the race we've been talking about for since October, November maybe, and Haley's really made it a 2-person race and a 2-candidate race for second since then.
I got to give my praise again to J.N. Seltzer, the guru of Iowa polling with the Des Moines Register. She had DeSantis at 16, Nikki Haley at 20, Vivek at 8%, Donald Trump, I believe, at 48%. Pretty close in these early stages. Now, we're seeing about, again, 3,000, maybe 4,000 votes counted so far. We don't know how many there are going to be tonight. In 2016, Republicans, there were 180,000 votes cast in that large field. Now, I don't think anybody expects us to see that tonight. Many people that have been out canvassing for these candidates have met resistance from people that said, I support so-and-so, it's just too cold, and it's not safe, and I want to stay home. So how that impacts, if that even impacts one candidate over the other, is anybody's guess right now. We've never been in a situation like this before where we're talking about dangerously cold conditions keeping people from taking part in the process.
Mike, you might remember this off the top of your head as well, but we spoke with Eric Trump, Skylar Fall did in Des Moines at 6, and I believe he said their goal was to hopefully have 12% of registered GOP voters come to caucus across the state. The number 12% was out there. I believe that's what he was referring to, was trying to get 12% of voters in.
I believe so. I wasn't.
But again, you hear 180,000 back in 2016. It's 10 below out. You'd take a halfway full room, I'd imagine, particularly if you're the Trump camp, because based on all your polling, 3 out of 5 of the people that are coming into your room are probably voting for Trump.
And this is one thing that the former president's campaign, has done very well compared to 8 years ago. 8 years ago, the former president was holding these big rallies, which he still does. They're much smaller now. He was flying in, flying out, literally holding events at the airport he was landing at and then getting out of Dodge. Not very personal, not very much like a caucus campaign where we see Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley just, as we say, pressing the flesh and getting up close and speaking intimately with these voters. That's something that Donald Trump doesn't do, but his organization behind him is much larger this time around, and they are on the ground every day. If you ever went to his rallies, they have very detailed flyers and videos playing before he appears, explaining exactly how you caucus for Donald Trump. They want to make sure that these people are not only motivated, but know how to do it, because they want to run up the numbers. I don't think this race was ever in question here in Iowa, but the margin is going to tell the tale of whether or not there's going to be a challenge in the next 2 months to him getting the nomination a third time.
And again, we saw that poll today from the Des Moines Register, Mediacom Iowa, and NBC News. Basically 40% of likely GOP caucus voters say they either support MAGA or they consider themselves ultra MAGA. I believe each side was about 1 in 6 voters considers himself either supporting MAGA in its entirety, or they're way on the side of it, where you still had about a third that said they really could take it or leave it. That's still a sizable portion of people that are fully behind him. You have to imagine we're seeing that unfold again and again tonight.
And I think that's something that the Republican Party is going to take a very close look at in the contest moving ahead, because I believe it was 18% identified as ultra MAGA. Those are the people that one would assume if Donald Trump is not on the ballot in November, they're not coming out. Sure. Now, somebody like Nikki Haley can make the argument of, we don't need that 18%. We can get that percentage from independents, as national polls show her comfortably ahead of Biden right now. The only candidate, over 5% ahead of Biden. Ron DeSantis losing, I believe, within the margin of error, about 3 points. Donald Trump within 1 point. So this is something that the Republican Party has been grappling with. They won't say it publicly, but many leaders in the Republican Party would like to be done with Trump, but they need his voters. And that's the tightrope you see. You see Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. They are running against this former president, but rarely will you see them criticize him. Now, I don't know how you defeat an opponent without criticizing them, but they're trying to walk that fine line, so if they get the nomination, as many of his voters as possible will still come out in November.
It's an interesting observation, because, like you said, you have this chunk, 18% of likely caucus goers that are basically, if it's not our guy, we're not showing up in November. That's about a fifth of your entire voting state for your party. That feels unprecedented, that you have that big of a chunk that says, our guy or nobody, and we're just not going to show up, and there's no way to swing them back to anybody else.
If I had a nickel for every time something unprecedented happened.
We said it earlier.
Yeah.
Never seen anything like it, and we've said that 20 times already.
And the reason that works for Donald Trump is that, again, these are people that probably never took part in the political process before, likely never voted for a candidate for whatever reason. And so this is an added boost that no other candidate, regardless of their views, can seem to latch on to. And Donald Trump is not a man that's going to let them go or let his hold on his base go either. That's not what we're used to. We're used to somebody who loses a presidential race and kind of steps aside and perhaps helps the next candidate for the party. That's not Donald Trump. That's never been Donald Trump. And so he is going to take this all the way to the finish, no matter what happens. But right now, the path looks pretty good for him right now.
Yeah, so far, you call the caucus within about a half an hour of things starting. We are certainly seeing what happens here. So we're going to put a button on this, and in 45 minutes.
Statements from both the DeSantis campaigns. I can't bring them up because they're in email and it's hard to read.
Mike Howell, our assistant news director and EP extraordinaire, helping us out with this stuff right now.
So Trump says the people of Iowa sent a clear message tonight. Donald Trump will be the next Republican nominee for president. It's now time to make him the next president of the United States. And Ron DeSantis, this is interesting, says it is absolutely outrageous that the media would participate in election interference by calling the race before tens of thousands of Iowans even had a chance to vote. The media is in the tank for Trump, and this is the most egregious example yet.
Well, my understanding is once you are at a caucus site at 7 o'clock, you cannot leave. So I don't believe a call on a broadcast network is going to influence anybody who has braved double-digit below wind chills to go cast a vote for their candidate. I get what he's trying to drive the narrative that he's still a relevant candidate. But I imagine it may also be coming out of a sense of, we really lost momentum to Nikki Haley, and now we need to find a way to get it back. And to be honest, he's trying to take a page from Donald Trump's playbook that, for him, has been rather effective.
I think the people we were following, some officials said that the best case scenario for DeSantis tonight was finish second, keep it around 10 points of margin. And it's not even close. And now he is in that fight for second that he's been in now since Haley really made her march towards that that second place spot, and certainly with Christie dropping out last week, building that momentum. But this is where we're looking at now with 4% reporting. Again, Trump running away with more than half of the GOP caucusing so far. DeSantis with that 3-point lead, and then Vivek Ramaswamy holding up in fourth. This is how it's more or less, again, the Des Moines Register polls and everything we've seen. This is more or less maybe flip the candidates, keep the numbers. This is more or less what we've seen.
At least in these early stages, these are all within the margin of error. They're within about 3.5%. So that's impressive. But again, they're trickling in. Obviously, these numbers are coming from some of the smallest precincts. Sure. So obviously, these larger ones in urban areas, that's going to bode well, probably both for Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. I wouldn't be surprised if these margins change a little bit. But honestly, with the exception of Donald Trump, getting over 50% is going to be a win for him because, again, Ted Cruz won with, I believe, 30% in 2016. So getting that majority is, for lack of a better term, it's a mandate. And that is something that could sting a Nikki Haley in New Hampshire as she will begin focusing her efforts on there tomorrow morning.
And again, waiting to hear from her, of course. And obviously, if you're on the Democratic side, it's basically just party business tonight. You can get those presidential preference cards in, I believe, until February 19th. You can request those. We won't know the results of those until after Super Tuesday when everything's done there. So, and again, 2020 for the Democrats on the caucus side was one that has put them in the situation where they are now, where they're not even worrying about it and going about party business rather than being first in the nation on that side as well.
And I think they get kind of a pass. Now, I don't know if Iowa's ever going to regain first in the nation on the Democratic side. May not on the Republican side, depending on how things shake out. But they at least tried to make it more accessible. They at least tried to give it the sense that it was still first in the nation in spirit. But, what happens when we have a contested Democratic race in 4 years? Who's to say? The biggest problem the Democrats have with Iowa is in just 8 years, we have become a very deep red state. They don't believe we represent the rest of the country. They don't believe we're relevant because we're not a battleground state. We don't have a lot of delegates, or electoral votes rather, in a general election. So they have moved on to those states that frankly propelled Joe Biden. They want to focus on states like Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, and South Carolina, which was really what put Biden over the top 4 years ago.
All right, well, 5 minutes after I said we were going to put a button on it, now that we've really wrapped up everything here, we'll start our full caucus coverage on Iowa's News Now at 9 over on Fox 28 in about 40 minutes. And, of course, switching over to CBS 2 as always at 10 to recap everything. We've got crews in Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, and Iowa City and other spots around. Certainly, things have been called. They were called almost an hour ago now, but a lot to still unfold as we see what happens from here. First in the nation on the GOP side, and a lot to see what happens, as we've alluded to, in the next few weeks. So for Nick Weig, I'm Mitch Fick. We'll see you on Fox 28 in about 40 minutes for your caucus edition of Iowa's News Now.